Recording in progress.
Good evening. This is the Chicago Computer Society April 25 Linux SIG meeting. Tonight I'm really deviating from what I have been doing so far this year. And part of that is because of a lot of things that I have been doing, last 4 or 5 weeks when I've had the time to. With Linux. And so it came to my way of seeing things that are available and most Linux users probably have no idea about. So that's what we're covering tonight, is a lot of things that I'm doing. I'm doing some experimenting, which I'll get into. And at least that way you get some idea of what you have available that in many cases you're not taking advantage of. And some of it can make life a little easier. It could also give you some headaches, but controllable headache that you can turn off, just like taking an aspirin. But at any rate, I'll start by asking, does anybody have open forum questions, views, opinions? And everybody ignore Peter and Dennis.
I'm unmuted.
You've also got two different shirts on.
Yeah, at the same time.
The one that I'm seeing on the Dennis C is the correct color. The one I'm seeing on the Dennis is green, and it's not. It's a blue shirt.
Well, also your complexion's different on the two of them.
Oh,
Nah, it's
Yeah,
really
color
good.
balance.
You're just
I would
seeing it as
say
blue.
if I was to guess on the plain Dennis one, you have more reddish color in the image that's causing the blue to turn green.
Yeah, it's something called gamma.
okay. That's on the Linux box. I haven't figured out my camera in the Linux box yet, but
Well, this is what I.
on
Oh, go ahead, Dennis.
on the Linux box, on the back, I have a something to plug in, and it was green in color, or green tinged, and it had a circle with an arrow coming out of it, but that's all it said. Then I was able to find my manual, and that's labeled in the manual as line out port.
Line out means going to an amplifier, and it's for your audio.
Okay,
So
so
in
that was
other
my
words,
question. I've got some speakers from my old Packard Bell computer, and
right.
I thought maybe I should try to plug it in there. Should I plug it in before I boot up the computer rather than during? Next time I want to try it out.
Well, you can do either. It won't hurt a thing, Ned. But normally on most PCs, the audio jack holes are quite varied, and they all have different coloring. Green is for normal audio out, whether it's a unpowered speaker, a powered speaker, or some kind of headset or earbuds.
Okay.
And then you have the pink is for your microphone, and I can't remember if it was a beige or a white color is the line feed, and the line feed is for especially music lovers that will plug that in and go to their stereo amplifier and speaker system to play the audio.
Okay.
There are a couple other ones. There's a black one, and I forget what some of the other colors are. this gets into 2.1, 5.1, and I think it's 7.1 or 7.2 audio systems. And only some support all of them. In some cases, if you have a desktop computer, even an SFF, you can get a hold of audio only cards that can be plugged in and give you a full range of different kinds of audio setups that work best for you. But usually you have to have 2.1, 5.1, or 7.1 or 2 to get a bass speaker. Everything else is mid-range to high in treble range. And so if you really like some of the younger generations, etc., like the pulsating beat of the bass, then you have to have one of the more advanced audio playback systems that has a bass, a woofer,
Okay.
and it's powered.
Okay.
Peter, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I do.
Well,
ready
good.
for me?
We won't pay any attention to you.
I'll put it back up. I'll bother you.
Not as much as I can bother you.
Okay, so my open forum is for software programs that are not on the, what is it? The software manager,
Right.
that have specific files for Linux and do work. So the one I was playing around with this week, because I was upgrading the school computers as well as this one, is the Arduino Forum one. And it has for 64-bit, for 22 version mid programs. But it does, the only one that shows up in the software manager is the old 1.8.1, and right now it's at 2.4.6 in Arduino.
I've had a different piece of software that in Mint and Debian, it shows up as a 0.7.2.0, but in Cinnamon Ubuntu, it shows up as a 1.0.9. But it's transferable. I can take the copy I download from the Ubuntu and put it on Mint, which I've got running, and also on Debian. And I even was able to get a variation to work on Manjaro Linux. So
Yeah,
this happens a lot.
upstream versions. Depending on what its dependencies are, you may or may not be able to use an upstream version in various settings. LibreOffice is one of the ones that very often will work in an upstream version. I have 25 point something, whereas the supplied version is far lower. What you need to do is find out what the program's dependencies are. If those dependencies can be satisfied, you'll be good. One way to determine that is to install using GDebi or directly using the apt in the command line. That will tell you any kinds of errors that occur because of dependencies.
Yeah, because if it's not in the software manager, you either have to do the command line install or Synaptics if it's there. But on Synaptics, again, when you bring it up, you've got to do a reload first so it knows what you've got right now. And that way it will tell you if the program is available. It should also tell you what the dependencies are and automatically check them.
Okay, so
go ahead.
So this particular installer uses apt image.
Okay, it's an app image. That usually carries with it all its dependencies.
Right.
So if the app image will launch on your system, then you're pretty much good to go.
Right, and same with Flatpak. Though Snappak is a little bit different. That works mechanically a little differently, but usually will also work as well wherever it's invited.
Snap and Flatpak have frameworks. App image is completely independent.
Okay, so that's probably why they did it that way.
Yeah, they're considered all containerized packages, so that other dependencies in your system, as they change, such as library elements, as a good example, that all your programs rely upon, don't affect those specific applications that are app image, Flatpak, or Snappak.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that, can I do a little explanation?
Sure.
So what I did is I downloaded it and then I put it on the icon on the desktop. Because I've got 3 different users on this machine, and that seems to work because I set it up so that all users could see the primary desktop. So each user also has in its file system another folder that is installed libraries. And Arduino, under Arduino and then libraries. So that way, the Arduino libraries that it creates, the files it creates is in that folder. And it seems to work, and I just wanted to bring it up because this is an open.
It is with the advent of the app pack, the Flatpak, and Snap, is to try and reduce as much as possible over a span of time all the headaches caused by application dependencies, so that you can have everything working perfectly today. Tomorrow you get some kind of an update in, and it makes a change to just one entry in the operating system's library of files, and suddenly one or more programs that were working stop working. And the reason is the dependency of that application was changed by the upgrade of the package that doesn't contain the dependent portions, because libraries are like DLLs in Windows operating system. They are a big container themselves of various operational patches of code that can be executed by any given application. And it may be that you're only taking one chunk of code out of the whole file that is being executed by a given program. But you can have applications that have more than one of those modules that's in the file. As a developer, I'm not a developer, but I know of developers. Sometimes they create a module that is needed for dependency. They stick it in a library, and the bad part is, like I say, like a DLL, you can have an upgraded system, and it breaks that dependency because the one it put in may be older or newer and doesn't have that other developer's chunk of code. So there are multiple reasons why all of a sudden something that was working fails. It's a oddity. What programmers would refer to the libraries and the DLLs is they are a library of functions that can be used one or more of by any application program to do certain things without having to recode it and include it in their application, making their applications a bit smaller than they otherwise would be. But it's also haphazardly dependent
Okay,
upon.
so the other thing there is that since it's on the desktop, when I go hit the button in the bottom to find all the programs,
No,
it does not,
what
it
it
does
is
not show up on any of the lists.
no, what it is it's a container of all the elements needed for that application. And when you double click it, it'll install the actual executable, all the library dependency functions, etc., wherever they require to be in the operating system. And once that's achieved, you don't need that application on the desktop any longer.
One thing about
The only way I can start it is to click on the app image.
right.
Well,
App images are notorious for not integrating correctly with the desktop environment. And the way you get it onto the list in Linux Mint, for example, is you right-click on the LM icon and you edit the menu and add an item. To do that, you need to create for that app image a desktop launcher. And that desktop launcher needs to know what the command line would be saying to launch the application. With app images, it's pretty straightforward how that works.
Yeah, the what he's saying is besides the executable of that application, you may have additional parameters, flags, switches that have to be part of the command line of the launcher. But there's another possibility that is in my garbage for tonight.
Okay, huh?
There is also a program called App Image Launcher, which may or may not be available for Mint, which I will set up a framework that'll launch on any number of app images as long as they are formed correctly. So the App Image Launcher ends up on your start menu thing. And it's just called App Image Launcher. I'm not guaranteeing every app image will work with it.
Open with image writer. I have installed app image.
App images don't actually install. They're not installed software. They're like portable software.
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, basically, most software on Linux systems are portable. They don't do what we from the Windows world refer to as an install. An install is a program application that will modify the registry. A portable app, it just sits on the computer, will run all by itself, and does not affect the registry. So if you want to remove programs, if they're regular installed programs, you have to use something like Revo uninstaller or Geek uninstaller. And if they are portable apps, you just find the portable app wherever you put it, or wherever the possibly like the download folder as an example, and you right click on it and say delete. Gone.
I would like to put into chat a little discussion that happened in the Mint forums, and it is about App Image Launcher and what it does.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, yeah. Thank you.
Anybody else got anything?
So the other thing it did, and on the newer version of Arduino, it said that when I launched it the first time, that I've got to give permissions to the program to go to with a particular group so that it could read the USB port for the devices.
A lot of applications, you might have them in the download directory. You have to go in, right click, bring up the properties, and the second tab is permissions, and you have to adjust that to work correctly. You can also do the same thing from a terminal command line. It's the 777 codes that you got to play with.
Okay, so
Basically, all you're doing is you need to check off in Mint. You need to check off the checkbox that says allow execution as a program.
Yeah.
that, and then it needed to have the permission for at least the user to go in and work with the USB port. There's a different one. I had it. I did it before on the older version of Mint, and basically they lock it out.
Yeah, the USB port may require that you're a member of a certain group.
Yeah, that sounds right.
That you need to go in and set manually.
Well, I think they put something in the new program code to pop up the window, and then you hit a click box, and then it does it.
If it does it automatically, great. That's the easiest way. So it joins you into the group, and then you're good to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's another thing. Groups and permission.
And that happens for every user on the machine.
Yeah.
Yep.
You got to remember, each user on the machine is an independent entity, and as a result, if you have to make certain changes to the system for your login, you probably also have to go and do the same thing on all the other user accounts. It's not necessarily a generic setting. It's quite often per user. And when you get into certain characteristics of operating systems, certain things are global, like the OS itself, and your applications may all be globally set up per se, but are linked in to the user accounts either automatically, or you have to go in to link the application to a given user, and you may have to adjust the permissions accordingly.
In other words, all the users, each user has to get into that group in order to have the same privileges.
Right.
If that user is going to use that program.
Right.
Exactly.
There's no way around this on computers because it's part of security and privacy.
Understood.
Privacy of each user.
Got enough soda for all of us?
No. Offhand now, anybody else got questions, problems, answers, news that some of us might not know about? Okay, well, I've got one. I call it an FYI. And on my current Linux system here, which is my primary Linux system, and a couple of Windows systems, I'm experimenting by adding, where possible, a second SSD drive. In this case here, it is a small capacity, only 32 gigabyte, 2.5 inch drive, and having it mount always when you run the system. And I moved from the primary OS drive, which was all that originally existed. The swap or page file in the case of Windows, also known as virtual memory. And I also on Windows moved the restore point files to the secondary drive as well. Why did I do it? Moving the virtual memory to a non-OS drive other than another can achieve some performance improvements. It may not be extremely noticeable. Most times improvements have to be a minimum of 10% improvement, and most people it takes 20% improvement for them to even notice anything. But you have the operating system, all your running programs that you launched, all the background running programs the system runs for supporting your use of the computer, all wanting to use main memory, and this sometimes requires juggling the content with the virtual memory on a drive. This can lead into some delays. They're not major delays, especially with SSDs. They are more pronounced on a spinning hard drive. But having the swap drive or page file from a Windows system on a separate drive means that the OS, your applications, foreground, background, and stuff like that, they're doing it almost independently because they're two separate devices. So there's very, very little contention. It's not zero. Contention is not zero, but it's so minimal that you don't notice it as much as to when you have the swap and page file on the same drive as the OS is on. That does some restriction because there's a limit as to how much your main drive can take in the way of requests for getting information or putting out information. And that's an issue where conflict comes in, creates small delays. But I've been playing with this idea for several weeks, and so far it seems to work just fine. I also on Linux, since I don't have the equivalent of restore points, which are time shift snapshots. I keep them off on an external drive when I create them. And so I took the rest of the 32 gigabyte drive that wasn't being used by the swap partition I created there, and I turned it into /var. So if I were to show you my desktop right now, you would notice one icon for /var on the desktop as a drive, and var is frequently used for virtual machines. If you ever want to play with virtual machines, which I may try and do on Linux, I haven't done that other than through VirtualBox a little bit, and it wasn't totally satisfying, but I've never had VirtualBox totally satisfying my wants and needs anyway. So that's something that I'm playing with when I can manage creating some time, along with a lot of other things that I've been doing. So hopefully I'll remember in the future to let you know how things seem to be going with that experiment. But you got to understand, guys, that when you're playing with computers, there's a certain amount of time and effort you got to put into experimenting. Otherwise, you don't expand your horizon and get real use out of your machine. The most you do is things that you know and normally do, like reading your email, doing shopping online, paying bills online, things like that. That's not really using the computer's abilities. That's just replacing things from paper documents, i.e., like bank statements and similar paper documents, and doing it on the computer itself, which can be vulnerable. So you got to keep that factor in mind as well.
On this, back in the old days, you could use a USB drive to extend your memory in the machine back at the old days.
Yeah, before the stone wheel.
Right, before the stone wheel. Could you use a portion of this drive to do the same?
You don't want to do that. Number
Okay.
one, it's dirt slow. I guarantee you 100%. In fact, because of the last month here and some of the stuff I've been working on, I have lots of flash drives sitting here and have used them quite heavily. But I had to try and do something, and trying to do it with a flash drive, it was large volume, large files, and I could have died of old age, literally speaking, natural causes, waiting for that thing to get done, which I never did complete because either the system itself says, this is crazy, it's insane to do this. So they killed it altogether. And,
Okay.
And then there were other times because I was trying to do the same thing. It didn't automatically kill itself, but I ended up killing it. So what I turned around and did, I took an SSD that's been sitting there doing nothing. I took the USB adapter, plugged it in, 1, 2, 3, all done. I mean, lightning fast. The speed was obscene. And you also don't want to have that sticking out on a regular basis. So you don't want to do that. And you used to have on Windows, oh, what the heck was it called? It was a Ready Boost or something like that. That was on flash drive. But that's when we were using spinning hard drives. And the flash drive in that case there is faster than the spinning hard drive. So it made some sense there. But if you try on anything that's modern, especially if it's got an SSD inside of it, it won't even let you do Ready Boost because it knows it's slower. So it makes no relative sense. That's why we create in Linux a partition for the swap. If you don't, then it creates a swap file, just like Windows has inside of it the page file. It's the same function. There are differences between them, but that's more semantics than the reality of what they're trying to do. But you don't do that, and if you're going to expand any drive, even just temporarily, you want to expand it to a SSD plugged into a USB port. You want to mount it probably as a slash TMP or slash TEMP, depending on the version of Linux you've got. That would be a temporary work area that you're creating.
Okay, so we were kind of looking at two different directions. I was thinking your internal second SSD.
It's a hard drive installed.
What?
It's a hard drive. It's a SSD installed.
Correct.
So I've
Could
got
you partition some of that off to be like extra RAM in the machine?
no.
Or does it,
That's what the
does by
swap file. That's what the swap file is. That's what virtual
Okay.
memory is. A swap file, a page file, is extending what appears to be RAM in your system, but it is slower. There is nothing faster than RAM physical memory. The
Right.
next best thing is some kind of a swap or page file that's virtual RAM or memory. And that's secondary fastest. But again, you run into conflicts if the swap file, page file, and the OS are all on the same physical, a single device. Because only so much can get done at one time. You can only have one program at a time addressing the virtual memory. Period.
Yeah.
And until it's done, something else cannot access it. So you got a delay. Now, when you have it split between two drives, it still has some of that delay, but a lot of the delay has been eliminated because they are two different addressable devices.
Okay, so what size of a swap file area did you put on the second drive inside the machine?
That is totally dependent upon the hardware of your computer. And I'm not joking when I say that. The older the system is and the less memory, RAM memory, you have on a system, the bigger your swap file has to be. On a more modernish system, a CPU, and a decent amount of RAM, at least 8 gigs or more, you need little to nothing in the swap file. So on, say, I've got an i5 second or third generation CPU, and I've got 4 gigs of real RAM memory, I might need 3 or 4 gigabytes of a swap file. On a, say, a i5 6th, 7th, 8th, and on up a generation CPU, and I've got, say, 8 gigs of memory, I might only have 2 gigabytes of a swap file. And if I've got way more than 8, such as 12 or 16 gigs, 32 gigs, well, actually you can go 16, 20, 24, 32 gigs, 64 gigs, with laptops, SODIMM, because you only get 2, and some desktops only allow 2 RAM modules. Those are kind of combinations you can get on those machines. You might not need a swap file at all, but I would still make at least a 1 gigabyte swap file / partition. If you don't make the partition, then the OS will create its own internal file. It'll try and manage it and keep it as small as necessary. But that all varies upon the hardware, the amount of memory, and the age of the CPU, and what operating system you got. For example, with Windows 11, I've got the page file on 3 different machines running 11 that vary from about 4 gigs to 5.5 gigs in size. Having that big of a partition for a swap file on a Linux system is way overkill, unless you've got like only 2 gigs of memory. Now, if you got 2 gigs of real RAM memory, you're going to need a bigger swap file, 6, 8 gigs, and you're going to pay penalties in having that little bit of RAM memory. And that's not a joke.
Oh, okay, so let's do an example. I've got 16 gig of memory on this machine.
I wouldn't go over 2 gigs of swap file.
Okay, so now I want to put on a separate SSD installed in addition to what I've got in here.
Right, fine.
Okay, so, and I want to make part of that the swap file.
Well, what
So what, I currently think I got 2 gig of swap file on the main drive, which is a spinning drive right now. So let's say, what size SSD do I get, and what do I do with the extra space?
Well, you can use empty space for anything you want, whether it's now, today, or some tomorrow. As far as the size, to be honest, if the main thing you're trying to do, change the swap file to a secondary drive, if you can find them, you can go down to an 8 gigabyte SSD, a 16, 32, 64, 120, 128, on up. It won't matter the size other than for the swap file to be there, because with 16 gigs of memory, you don't need to create a swap partition bigger than around 2 gigabytes or 2048 megabytes. And the rest of the drive, you got to use your head for what you want to be doing on the computer. Think ahead as much as possible to say, okay, I want to do certain things, like maybe I want to have on Linux virtual machines. I could have a Windows virtual machine for a few Windows programs I cannot live without, as an example. And that goes into a /var folder that's normally in root. But you can make that on the secondary drive var and store the virtual machine images there. But they take up a lot of resources. You got to plan for probably between 20 and 30 gigabytes of real space per virtual machine, and there are a few that even go bigger than that. So you got to plan out, you got to think out, what do you do with the rest of the drive space that's on that drive for the future projects. And you're into Adreno as an example. That's another example. You can put all your Adreno out there on that. You've got some collection of videos. You can make a partition. These are my videos, and put them in there.
So if I'm capturing videos from online,
right,
on the machine,
right.
So I don't think this machine's got a separate video card, but it's using part of RAM for video.
It's using what for the video?
I think it's using part of RAM as video RAM.
I guarantee
it doesn't have a separate video card.
Okay, let's segue for that for just a moment. There are 3 kinds of machines in general regarding video. You have our older machines. They have in most cases just a plain Intel graphics display module. Sometimes you get a Radeon also, but and NVIDIA on a few. If your machine, at least under Windows, you look at the task manager properties of the performance, you will see only 4 items. Well, I take that back. You'll see CPU, memory, and then you'll have 1 or more drives, and then you might see one called a GPU. If you don't see the GPU, you're using the old style Intel display chip. If you have the GPU showing and it's not a discrete plugged in card, then you have a GPU, but it has next to nothing in dedicated memory. We're talking probably no bigger than 256 megabytes of dedicated video memory. And the third is a real plug-in graphics card. That has anywhere between 1 gigabyte on up to, I think the last number I remember was 24 gigabytes on a graphics card, which I don't want to pay the electric bill on. Generally speaking, no matter what you have, when it comes to video, you are using the main memory of that machine. But on the real old ones, it only goes up to about 256 megabytes of video memory, because that's the way the video memory was set up way back in the earliest days of our computers. The ones with a GPU, they will reserve as much as 50% of your real RAM memory. Now, what the OS will do is try and manage the operating system and your application programs and the amount of video memory really being used. So it's a tug of war. But on those machines, it is also you run into conflicts sometimes, especially on Zoom, especially if you're hosting, where the OS and your application programs, which includes Zoom, are conflicting with the video memory of real RAM to build the video image you are looking at on your screen. And I've had that many times. And that's where you get some freeze-ups that occur, because it's there's a conflict of what's going on trying to get the CPU's attention. The GPU relieves the CPU of a lot of work, because otherwise the CPU has to, in software, create your image and put it out through the video chip. On the other hand, a GPU of either type, the inside limited one or the plug-in card, they take over the encoding and decoding of all the video signals and do a better, faster job. Take, for example, occasionally I have to edit some of our meeting videos that I create. Well, without a good GPU, it would take an abhorrent amount of time. We're talking many hours to reconstruct the video once you've made the changes. With a good GPU, as little as 2 gigabytes, it takes less than half the time. And if I had more dedicated memory on the GPU, it would take probably even less time than that. So it is you're constantly doing trade-offs between hardware, software. Video, when you are totally reliant upon the CPU to do running of your OS, of all your running applications, foreground and background, and you're trying to build and encode and decode the video, you're really putting a big strain on it because it has to be done in software on the video. When the GPU is available, it does hardware acceleration. And that hardware acceleration takes the load off the CPU, so now I can do the other functions with less contention for that memory and everything else. Anybody got any comment on that part?
I'm looking up my graphics card on there. And
I've got some real old ones that were like 256 megabytes of memory, 512, I think even on 1 gig. They just don't do enough because they're too old a technology. You got to have a slightly more modern version of the GPU that really knows how to encode. And when I'm on a Windows system, I can look at the performance of the GPU and see if it's really working or not. And you got to be careful in Windows because you got to make sure you activate it. It doesn't automatically activate. So you could have a GPU sitting there doing nothing but sucking up electricity and doing nothing for you. Once it's activated, that's when it actually is doing something for you. I don't think anything like that exists in Linux, but I could be wrong. I haven't looked into that aspect.
so I've got an onboard graphics card.
Okay. How much memory does it have?
It doesn't say. It doesn't say it in
Pete, what you have is actually shared graphics. It's integrated graphics, shared memory.
Okay.
So it reserves a certain amount of RAM.
Well, yeah, and that's what I was getting at. And
Right.
even if you got a more modern GPU on the board and it shows up on Windows as a GPU, or you have a card, it's still reserving some of that RAM memory in case of overflow of the dedicated memory that the GPU has. And
Tim,
when you,
for the sake of tonight, I'm just looking at Linux.
pardon?
I don't care about what, for the sake of tonight, I am just talking about Linux.
I understand that, but the graphics processor doesn't care if you're using some OS you created personally and nobody else has got it.
Oh, okay. So what I'm looking, the discussion is using integrated graphics, which means that integrated memory, which means it's taking part of that 16 gig of memory and using it away.
That's correct.
Okay, so I'm doing video capture.
Okay.
Live video capture on the machine, which takes memory.
That's right. Up to half of
Okay,
your
so-
physical memory.
Okay, so would it help me to put a second SSD in the machine if I can? I don't know if I can. And make a swap file in there the same size as the physical memory on the machine to take up some of that load? That's the question.
It will take a little bit of the load. It will not take as much as you want because Linux tries to avoid using the swap file as much as it can. And so it may offload some, but not all. And video processing is a big headache, and that's not a joke. That function alone consumes massive amounts of the whole computer's power and capability, and you can't totally offload that. Your video capture card may have dedicated memory on it. If it does, then that's helping you. If it
I'm
doesn't,
using a system, not a video capture card.
all right, then you're using software to do all the load through the CPU. Now, maybe you ought to think about soldering about 4 more CPUs on top of the one that's already there in the machine to get the horsepower of what has to be done in software to do any video rendering and coding and decoding. It's a killer.
I'm not editing I'm not editing the videos.
It don't matter. It cannot. Video doesn't exist without memory, period. And if it's done in software by the CPU, you're not talking about 5 characters of code executing to do something. You may be talking megabytes of code to do the video rendering, as well as the other operating system functions and all your foreign background programs that you're running at the same time.
In other words, the captured video does need to be rendered.
Got to be converted to MP3 or MP4.
You cannot have a video without rendering.
That is transcoding, and it is very RAM intensive.
That's very extreme. Yeah. That's the encoding, decoding of video. When you are taking captured and you're trying to put it out to a file, that's encoding it. If you're playing a YouTube video, you are decoding it so that you can see what the graphic is. If you're trying to do both, you're pulling in a video and pushing out video like my meeting videos are. You're doing both. If you don't have a GPU, you're killing the CPU and overall total system response.
Yeah, what you're doing is you're transcoding dynamically, and because it's a dynamic operation, it's going to strain your resources.
I tend not to do anything else if I'm doing this.
Yeah, but you're not taking into account the background operations programs by the operating system, besides your other programs that you're running, that you're doing the capture with, etc. Those are all taking up resources. You have IRQs that are saying, CPU, I want your attention now. And if you don't give me your attention, there's going to be war. And at the same time, you're encoding through software that's a slow process all by itself. You don't have hardware acceleration, which is what a GPU provides.
True. It does work, though.
Yeah.
So now the question is, will doing Tim's thing of putting a second SSD in,
it may improve a little bit.
No.
Don't expect much.
It won't do much at all. The only cure would be if you can add a GPU with its own video RAM, do so.
This is a 7th gen Core 7 machine, Intel.
Okay, you got an i7 7th gen, and bottom line, for doing what you're attempting to do, you need a 7 or a 9, not a joke. And it has to do with the jobs you're trying to do and the resources. But in your case, like Bob is saying there, you need a drop-in GPU card if that machine can handle it. And the more memory you have on that card, the more expensive it's going to be, but it's going to pay back dividends in offloading a lot of crap going on the CPU now to the GPU, which it's designed for video encoding, decoding.
Yeah.
And also by reducing the strain on your system resources, you will improve the probability of longevity of the machine.
Right. That's another factor, because if you're overtaxing the CPU, it's generating more heat. More heat, the less life you have in electronic components.
Yeah. Okay, you've answered the question. Doing that for the sake of adding RAM performance isn't going to help me any.
Well,
That
now,
was the big.
on your machine, can you add more RAM?
I don't know. I don't know. I haven't opened it up. I've got to look it up.
Well, you can open up the side. You can open up the side. It either has 2 slots or 4 slots. That's it.
This is an all-in-one.
Okay,
This is
then
an
all bets
all-in-one.
are off. All bets are
Yeah,
off.
I understand that.
You can't drop in a GPU card in an all-in-one.
I know that. I know that.
So you're stuck between a rock and a hard place on that one.
That's why I was asking about the SSD.
And
I may be able to with this. I may not.
the as far as an all-in-one, even with 16 gigs, odds are you've only got 2 modules. They're SODIMMs, and odds are, well, I'll take that back. There's a strong chance, especially with a BIOS upgrade to the last version, you might be able to go as high as 20 to 32 gigabytes in memory by using 16 gigabyte RAM modules. But don't count on it. Your max may be still 16. It's something you have to research. There's no way around that. So you may be stuck with 16. I've got some machines of the same vintage, but I haven't looked past going past 16. I have some newer machines. And some of them I'm okay with, but some of them won't budge, I guess is the best way to phrase it.
Yeah.
And mine are business class machines, not consumer class. And most all-in-ones are consumer class. All right, I want to try and continue on with a little bit.
Yeah.
In Software Manager, on most distros, you have, and Synaptics as well, and I'm positive you can install it from the command line, AbiWord. AbiWord is a old lightweight word processor. It handles RTF, which I need and use, and I know other people needing that particular characteristic, because it can include URL hot links as well as some graphic images. It also handles text formatted documents. AbiWord has something I've heard of before. I've never needed it, and I don't perceive I will need it. But I can see where it could have helped me in some things in the distant past. It's called Revision. And you're using your word processor kind of like an idea pad. Your mind's on fire, you're thinking of things, you're typing it in as fast as you can, etc., etc. Then you start reviewing it and you say, oh, I want to change this in some fashion. You can make a revision, which is a copy per se, so that you can now change that, and you still have what you had in one of the revisions, and you can keep doing it. It's like taking a snapshot. The one thing that it doesn't have that I was kind of surprised about, and I wanted to use it, was indent and unindent. That's where it, instead of using the tab key and or using the space bar umpteen times to do artificial indentation, it's automatic indentation. But other than that, it's a good little processor, something to think about. And what I'm going to do here is going to share my.
I've got to step out for a second.
You're not allowed. Come on. Finally. Okay. Now, this here is Abbey Word. It's not real fancy. And right now, Windows users are lamenting that 24H2 has removed WordPad, which I use heavily, but I now have a way of putting WordPad back on 24H2 and it works just fine. I did have some other alternatives. Abbey Word is, I think, only made for Linux, but this R here in a page, that's the revision option. But when it comes to various things, it's got a lot of built-in feature capabilities. I'm kind of surprised considering how old Abbey Word goes back. But in general, it is a pretty good light word processor that you don't have to bring out LibreOffice or OpenOffice and some WPS and etc. to do your word processing in if it's light, if you're doing light stuff. My handouts usually have articles, names, and active URL. That requires the ability to have a word processor that either has RTF capability or a full word processor that will give you a hyperlink. So you just click on it and it takes you to that web page address. Without RTF, and you have it in a text file, you have to do a copy paste. Copy from the text and paste it into a tab in your browser. So I thought this would be something good for generalities that you may like to have. Another one that I want to kind of breach. None of us is getting any younger, though I certainly am fighting it as much as I can. But here is accessibilities, and I'll see if, yeah, I can enlarge this some. Some things do enlarge and some don't. There. I also have Zoom capability, which I mentioned in the past. But anyway, you have here a number of things. You can have high contrast. Certain people with vision problems have to have high contrast capability. I'm glad I don't. Some may need large text because their eyesight is failing. I know one person in particular. And then you have a screen reader that you can take advantage of where you, if you got a text document, you can have the computer read it to you. Then you have desktop zoom capabilities. This is a general zoom, and if you have it on, you may or may not be able to control exactly how much you increase the magnification. Magnification right now is set at 1, but I could set it to 1.5, 2, and some are limited to that, but there's another setting out there that I found that gives you, on some systems, fractional increments. And if yours can handle it, that's a big plus, because now you can go 110, 120, 130, 140. Mouse wheel modifier. I don't generally mess with it myself, but if I hold down the Alt key or the Super key, the Control key, the Shift key, or I can disable it altogether as to its functionality. You have scroll at screen edges, mouse tracking mode, uh, cursor moves with the content, and that can be changed to keep the cursor centered or keep the cursor pushes content around. I've never played with it. It's something you can experiment with. Then you have lens mode, and I haven't looked into that yet. Lens shaping, you can have a square, horizontal strip, or a vertical strip. But I haven't played with that one yet. I haven't had time. I don't have time for a hell of a lot. I'm having to push things off a lot. So that's something else that I came across. Another one is Bleach Bit. This is in Software Manager as well as by command line or Synaptics Package Manager. And in some cases, BleachBit is a native install, and in some cases, it's like a flat pack, maybe even a snap pack. I'm not sure about the latter. But in general, what I'm trying to bring up here, notice in BleachBit here, oops, all right, you turkey, I moved that a little too much. I have a bleach bit and a bleach bit as root. This is because even in Windows, you have basically what would be the root section, which is the operating system and your application binaries for your programs. And you have the user section, which is all your stuff that you create or download, etc. And as root cleans out accumulating garbage in your operating system. In the other bleach bit, it cleans out basically what's in your home directory. One word of warning: if you just do an update, don't do bleach bit until you have rebooted. Anything that is, shall we say, in limbo between the download install and a reboot can be wiped out in part or in whole by bleach bit. So always, before you run bleach bit, use a little common sense and do a reboot. Now, on some Linux distros, instead of getting 2 lines in the menu there, you get 1. And I haven't experimented enough with it yet to find out if I can do what I do on Windows with BleachBit. There you get 1 entry. When you double click on the icon for the BleachBit in Windows, it will bring up the UAC, wanting the administrator's password to execute. That cleans up the system portion. However, if you run it again and on the UAC you say no, it runs anyhow, but it does the users section. And you would have to do that per user account. I guarantee it. Whereas with the administrator's password for just the system functionality and code, that's global to the whoever, whatever user account you have on your system. It doesn't matter. But when you get into the other one that's cleaning up the user section, you got to do it per user. This may be true in the Linuxes that only show 1 entry in the startup menu. So I thought I'd toss out that little tidbit. Now, the next thing down I've got is there's also a program called Stacer. I brought this up before as well. It's in the software manager in Synaptics. I think you can do it from the command line also. It's a general purpose utility similar to Glary utilities on Windows. It also has a cleanup function that appears to be mostly just the user area, not the whole system, like in BleachBit can. And this is basically what Stacer looks like. Come on, do it my way. That's right. So you have here a rocket mode. Basic. I gotta kill a cat here, trying to sing. I have a program here that's active. All these others I have deactivated unless I know I'm going to be using them kind of heavily. Then I will activate them, and this will do startup applications. So right now in Linux, I'm controlling some of the applications that automatically will start up every time you log in to a Linux OS. This one here, I'm going to leave alone for the time being, but it's something I will be deactivating. The next one here is a little whisper room. This is the cleanup that it does, and what it does is that you select all. It puts a green one under each one of these categories, or instead of doing the all, you can put a check mark under each of the areas you want to take care of, such as package caches, report caches, application logs, application caches, and the trash bin in general. This is something that for the most part needs to be done per user. Then you have a search function in here. I don't know how well it does. I haven't taken time to use it. You have system services. This is just like Windows. These are all background running programs that are part of the operating system that start up and run and either complete and turn off for the rest of the run or continue to run at all times. So if it's got a double green, it's running at all times. If it has a green red, it will shut off as soon as it's done its function at startup. So that's something else you can use to control some of the functionality. You better know each one of these as to what it does and what its purpose is. You do not want to disable something that might cause you a nightmare, such as an unrecoverable system. You have in here what processes are running in your system, regardless whether you know it's running or not. Then you have uninstaller. This can do uninstall of applications as well, and it's an option you can take advantage of, or in most cases you don't have to use an official uninstaller to get rid of most packages. Then you have performance. How's my performance, Mr. Peter? You can see how that system is running and how loaded it is when you're trying to do this video capturing. And it gives you a lot of graphical information to tell you how things are going on your system. It has some host management. Most people never have to play with hosts, but people who do have servers quite often have to make modifications in here. And it used to be a age-old trick that kind of backfired because the bad guys got wind of it and found other ways around it. You could put in sites you want to deny access to, so that you can't go out in the browser to the dark web and get content out of there, as an example. You have in here APT Repository Manager. This is all the ones that are being used right now. There was another one from 2.21.3, and that's was automatically disabled when I went to 22. You have also disk settings. I have the right one turned on. If you don't have it turned on when you want to exit Stacer, it will ask you, do you really want to quit every single time? So with this turned on, it won't ask you that. You can also turn this on. At login, it will automatically run Stacer and have it running whether it's visible or not on your system. So these are some of the things of this particular utility. The next thing I want to get into, I think, is the a potential gold mine. So I'm going to come up to settings here, and let's see if I can get this resized as much as I can. I think I'm still, yeah, okay, that's as large as the text gets. I have it set to 1.4 or 1.5. At any rate, some of you may be familiar with at least a few of these, but a few of these you may not know, and here's another way of getting to that accessibility as I talked about earlier. But I want to go over here to actions. This one, a lot of people probably haven't played with. Everything in here, if you read through even on your system, they all have a check mark in front of them. That means they're active. If, on the other hand, you hit the minus, you highlight one and you hit the minus key, it deactivates it so it's not running. So you have to know, again, what are these doing? Right now I can say on Warpinator, I'm not using it. If I want to save a little bit of system resources, I can negate it. The check mark came out. Anytime in the future, I can say, hey, I want to use the Warpinator. I can come back in, hit the plus key, the check mark's back, and it'll be running again.
Hey Tim, there's a black box at the top of the screen, so I can't see what program are you in here. Maybe you could drop your box down a little bit. There's a.
See what it's doing. I don't know if I can make any. How's that look?
Yeah, I can see system settings. Okay.
Well, I said system settings. If I go back, this is the go back. Actions. That's what it is. Period. Actions. These are all system settings. Everything in this box is system settings. Period.
Okay.
So saying system settings just means you went into the menu, you brought up system settings. These are all the possibilities. Well, actions is just one of those things.
Okay.
Now, in addition, I can click on the download tab. These are all other things I can add if I find there's a possibility of value of them to my system and increase my productivity, and at the same time maybe reduce some of my labors through old habits that these automate. Now, what you do if you want one, you click it, system settings, and I think it's this one here. No, that's updates. I can uninstall it if it's installed. And here is a light bulb for more information about that particular setting. And it tells you what it's all about. Now, it's going to give me a headache. I can tell that right now. All right, back to here. So it's these are not on the system right now. If you want it, you have to download, install it onto your system, and if once you've done that, you'll have to come back to Manage tab. You'll find it in there, and you have to highlight it and hit the plus key to activate it. In addition, there are layouts of actions, and these are like launchers on the system and allow you to manipulate these and create a new launcher if you want to. Now, you can also, with this switch on, I can, besides this plus sign here, I can hit this plus sign over here. Or I can highlight one and hit the minus key to remove it. So this gives you flexibility and gives you more options on your system for automation and getting jobs done easier and sometimes quicker than other methods. The next one is applets. Applets. Right now, calendar is marked. I'm pretty sure most of these are my defaults. As you can see, some have a check mark in front of them. Let me enlarge that. And some do not. And you have to, again, look at these with a grain of salt as to what you want to do. I can take this expo as an example. If I, it's a type of viewer. And I can say down here in the middle button at the bottom, uninstall it. Take it off my system. I don't need it. Just make sure you, A, remember you removed it, and B, you can add it back because there's a download section, and just like in the actions. So there's flexibility. If Expo, you want to run it right now, it's not runnable. But if I hit the plus key, it's now got a check mark, so it can be run. Some of these, when you activate or deactivate them, you have to do a reboot in order for the action to occur. In other words, if I'm activating this one here and I do a reboot, it will, when I log back in, Expo will be running. If, on the other hand, it was running and I do a minus key, it's now deactivated. I reboot when the system starts up. This will not be running. So it's another option. The Downloads tab has tons of downloads you can add to it. You go back to the Manage tab to activate or deactivate it. And for example, here's sticky notes. I don't know how comparable this is to a Windows sticky notes, but it gives you the same general concept. Small notes that paste into a on the desktop or as a panel that has a bunch of sticky notes in it. And you can add them and delete them as needed. Then I come down to desklets. Desklets, this is the default on my system, probably on yours too. None of these three launch automatically. I can put a plus sign and it will activate on a reboot, or a minus to deactivate it. I can also uninstall it if I want to. Odds are most of these features are not a lot of code, so you're not going to save a lot of storage space. However, you have a download button. And now you can add Google's Calendar as one of them. The weather, and many, many more features, and then go back to Manage to activate them so that they run at each login. And you have some general settings of decoration of disklets. I've never done it. It's either no decoration, a border only, or a border with a header that tells you what that desklet function is in general. You also have snap desklets to the grid. All desktops have a grid pattern for the icons like all these on the desktop. Each one of these is in a square of the grid pattern you can't see, and that's the bar partition on that second drive. Then you have width of disklets. Right now it's 25 pixels wide. You can increase that or decrease it. It means that you're squeezing space out between each of the desklets that are on the desktop where this text is at. But see, most of them have a pretty good sized gap above them, and you might be able to change that and have more columns of disklets on your desktop, which I recommend you try and not use too many. You also have lock the disklets to current position. What does that mean? This works just like it does on Windows. There is a auto sorting feature that frequently on Windows is automatically on at the beginning, and it drives people nuts because they know where certain icons for certain programs are at to activate them, and all of a sudden the automatic sorting feature kicks in, and now I got to go hunt for them even though they're in alphabetical order. At the same time too, if you turn this feature on, that won't happen. Wherever you put the disklets, it stays there. Next one. Extensions. Extensions, These are all deactivated as well at the moment. But one's about cinnamon dynamic wallpaper. I'm not sure exactly why I would want it. I didn't research that part. But there may be reasons for some of these that you can look up. If it's got the magnifying glass, it gives you the ability to make configurable changes to that particular one. But I think for that to activate, you have to have it activated. So I have to hit the plus key. Now it went from a light gray to a white. Now I can configure that one, and this is what that particular one would be like. So I'm going to deactivate it since I wasn't using it, and from time to time I go have a little spare time. I go into these things to look at them, and again, you have more. This is a downloaded one, and it's active. It allowed me to activate it, and you have more and more of these out there. And what the check mark here means, in the download tab, I have this on my system. I don't need to download it again. Same with the second one. But if I want this one here, Cinnamon Maximus, undecorate Windows as you like it. I'm not sure exactly how that would work out, but you download it here first to install it. But I can click that. I can click the light bulb, and this is what information it provides me, so that I can decide, am I interested or not? If I'm not interested, why bother? And if I am interested, I can download it, and then I go into the manage, find that, and hit the plus key to activate it. Next, and hang on one second here. Okay. Now, this one, if you're on an equivalent of a desktop, be it any form of mini or USFF, which is an ultra slim format, or a regular SFF, small form factor, like Dennis's Optiplex 3050, or you have a full desktop. This won't be of any interest, but gestures. This works with touchpads on your laptop. This gives you feature capabilities of being able to do things similar to what you would do on a smartphone. So you got pinching, you got tapping, what they do. You can change what these say here to your heart's content within its own restrictions. As you can see, there may be a number of settings. There may be only a few settings for each one of these. For example, if I leave it alone, the left swipe is to trigger at gesture end, meaning that as I'm done with the left motion on the touchpad, that's when it activates. And if you do the right one, it's as you go right and you're at the end of the right swipe, that's when it activates. Or you can change the activation in some instances, not all. you got 3-finger swipes, you got 4-finger swipes, and you got 5-finger swipes. Except I've only got 4 fingers and a thumb, so I don't know how what I do for the 5th finger. And then you got pinching, which is a zoom capability that you may be able to activate to zoom in, zoom out. Tapping, what that may do. But let's see if I get back into this here in gestures. Right now, pinching and tapping on the, there's tapping, what it can do, and there's pinching, what it can do, and then there's some settings as well. In the settings, it's mostly enable or disable all gestures if you don't want to mess with it. The speed of your swiping, the speed of your pinching, and the opposite of pinching are adjustable for your needs. Now, let's get back here again, and hot corners. This one I've known about for a while, but I didn't use it for a long time. You got 4 corners because you got a rectangle or a square screen if you got a real old one. And for example, I have the upper left corner. This is showing me all my workspaces and what I have running in each of the workspaces. And I'm going to come back to that one there. And if I go to the upper right, well, I might not have the upper right. I didn't do the, hang on. Let's see if I did it down here. Okay, I only activated the one, even though it says I have, right now, if I come down here into the bottom left side, it's set to do show desktop. And if I do it again, it shows me what I was having on the desktop. The top one up here shows all windows. That means this here is a window, and if I have other programs running, I do have that running, so I'm going to come up here. Now I can select which one I got if I am like our old systems used to having only one desktop and everything is cluttered because I have 2 or more programs running and I got to switch between them from time to time. This is a quick way of doing it. The 4th window, I did not, I mean hot corner, I did not, come on, I did not activate this one down in the bottom right. But I can, and I can say, okay, I can show all workspaces. Well, I'm already doing that. I can show all windows. I'm already doing it. I can show the desktop. I'm already doing that. So the 4th possibility I can have is command. And you can make each one of these corners one of these 4 things the way you want to do it. Not the way I did it or somebody else did it. And you can turn these corners off and on anytime you want to. Now, it used to be, going way back to when I first started this group, I used Redshift, and there's actually a couple versions. But a lot of people in various Linux distros have been having headaches with it. Well, Mint decided to not eliminate red shift, but discourage its use, and now has instead nightlight. That's its new replacement. And Mint thinks it's a better solution than redshift. So this will give you a reduction in blue light, and it's scheduled for automatic, but I can specify start and end times if that's preferable. I say leave it automatic. I can also click to preview what it does, but right now I'm sure it's not going to show me much of anything. If we were doing this, say at 5 o'clock Central Time, I could click that and you would see it turn from a bluish tint to a orangish type of tint. So that's another change that has occurred, I think, with version 22 or 22.1, one of the two. And there's another one that you got to check out, Peter. And that one is startup applications. These are various applications, and you have a simple off-on switch. And I can add or I can remove apps from this listing. I can edit them if there's anything to edit. And this is where I turned off redshift because I turned on nightlight. I can go into Stacer and turn off the redshift there, which I forgot to do. So it's one of these things that it gives you, and it even can give you a delay so that it's you're not having all these things start up exactly at the same time. That slows down boot process. So what it does, it picks out some delays, and so far the largest display I see here is 40 seconds after I log in for something to do its thing. And here's your update manager to tell you whether you got updates for your Mint. That's a 20-second delay. And then system reports say you have an upgrade to 22.2. Well, that's got a delay of 40 seconds. Then I have a print queue, and this one here is something that I added, and it's interesting for other reasons, but I'm not ready to really discuss that one until sometime in the future. It's still experimental even for me. Okay. Now, in addition, if I come down a little bit more, I had to make sure I covered what I wanted. I had to create a little bit of a script, so to speak. The next one is power management down in hardware. I turn off the screen after 45 minutes, but it's quite adjustable, and it depends upon your characteristics of when you want to say, hey, if this thing's been sitting here with no activity from me for as much as 10 minutes, blank the screen out and save power. Or it can be as much as 3 hours or never. I can also make this change here. Suspend the machine when inactive. That means that it goes to sleep and usually requires you to press the power button, and it'll come right back up. Okay. I set it to never because a lot of times I'm doing some large downloads. But if I were not doing much in the way of large downloads, I might wait for an hour or 2 hours of inactivity for it to suspend. Extra options: when the power button is pressed, it asks what I want to do. or I can automatically lock the screen, suspend immediately, shut down immediately, or do absolutely nothing. I don't think you want the latter, especially if you want to be able to turn your machine on and off. And then you have power mode. Now, this machine that I'm on here is a mini desktop. Desktops should be on performance to give you it's also the highest electric usage, but it gives you the optimum performance of your computer. If you're on any kind of a device with a battery, mostly laptop, but it may apply also to tablet, you'd go balanced or low power saver. It depends upon how long of a time do you need that battery to be alive before it needs to be hooked up to a charger. And if and each machine has its own characteristics as to how long it takes it to run down the battery to say 20%. And now you're in the red territory, and at any time it starts shutting down some features that are conserving energy. So that's why you have to choose between these two states here. A desktop computer has no battery. You're always hooked into the AC to run. That's why you might as well have it in performance mode. Now, one other wrinkle, and I don't have the text to share with you. I'm going to get out of share, I hope. All right. Come on, you dirty bird. That little bar is a control bar for Zoom hosts and co-hosts. Heck. I love it when this stuff does what it wants to do, not what I want to do. I'm going to leave it alone for the time being. At any rate, one other little peeve that I've got on some, not all systems that are Linux is your cursor pointing. Now, they give you some options, don't get me wrong, but sometimes the size of the pointer is not readily adjustable. Also, the color. Some people have a dark light switching color one that they have. I use that quite a bit in Windows, and I have some instructions in my document that allow me in modifying cinnamon mouse pointers. And it says for Ubuntu Cinnamon, it may also work in Mint. And I don't know, you'd have to experiment with it. But it gives you the ability to resize the cursor to a better setting for your needs. It also, sorry about that, for changing the color, you can explore different color themes that offer various color options. So you can, in the settings again, come here. Oops, wrong one. Hit the wrong one. Boy, I hate it when that happens. If you go into themes here, you might be able to change various color aspects, and you have an advanced setting, and you can add, remove popular functions. It's populating them right now, and give you a whole bunch of other potential options that you can play with.
Are you showing something on the screen, Tim? Because I see nothing except your.
I lost Tim's screen share a few minutes ago, and it's been replaced by Tim K has paused screen sharing.
Oh,
Double click to
it
enter
doesn't. It
full
doesn't
screen
show
mode.
here. It doesn't show that way here. Hang on a minute.
Well,
Like I said,
apparently I'm not the only one saying it.
good.
I don't see I don't see the option you're talking about, Bob, to restart it or whatever.
Use your imagination. Do you see anything now?
Nope. It just says you've paused screen sharing.
I don't even see
Oh,
it.
well, I got an option there. Okay.
What it's asking for is a double click to enter full screen mode. No, nothing like that. You might have to restart the screen share for us to see it.
At the moment, that's an impossibility. Or at least I ain't found the trick yet. T. Do you see anything yet?
Nope.
Yeah, well, like I said, this thing's doing what it wants to do, not what I want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not joking when I say that. Any change?
Nope.
No,
Nope.
I just see your desktop with a nighttime view and 5 files or something in the left corner. Nothing else.
Hmm. Interesting. Well, we're starting to learn some new things tonight on Zoom. I'll tell you that. So it ain't a total waste. But at the moment, I cannot even kill the share.
Mm.
Or at least I ain't figured out how. Hey, do you see something now?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
I'm not sure exactly what I did, but I finally got it back. Jeez, what a pain in the butt. Anyway, so you have themes in settings. Let's go back here. Themes in setting, top row on Mint 22. And you've got, let's go to simplified view. And let's see if I can enlarge this. And let's see if I can move that. Oh, get out of my... Good. I'm glad you can't. And in the simplified view here, you can specify a style. And they give you a Mint L, X, and Y. All right, whatever. Then you have a mixed dark light, or you have a dark only desktop, or a light only desktop. In the mixed mode, most applications are light. Some desktop elements are dark to create contrast. Well, you can get in here to the colors and change some of the color settings to suit your taste. And advanced settings, you have mouse pointer, and there's several here you can do, including a round one. But at any rate, some of them are small, like this one down here and this one here are very small ones. And that makes it hard even for you to see, probably. Then you have applications. What do they look like? Well, here's different things you can change. And then you have icons. Icons that look a lot like this. And then you have desktop and how the desktop looks. This is the bottom left that it's showing you here, and how you can change things. So Mint L looks like a dark background with visible icons, whereas Mint X is a light gray, and Mint Y looks like it can be either a light gray or a dark color for background on your taskbar. Or that's from Windows. It's called a panel.
Would any of this affect why on my Linux machine I'm having that green shirt instead of the blue shirt?
I think, let me get one, finish this off here and I'll try and address that.
Okay.
Under Add, these are a lot of things you can download on your system that may be of interest. And the general settings here are dark mode. Let applications decide, or you can change it to preferred dark mode or preferred light mode. You have show icons in menus, if that helps you identify by a graphic character versus just text. Show icons on buttons. I haven't apparently played with buttons, so that's off. You also have scroll bar behaviors that you can play with down here. Now, to go back to Dennis's, I think what you're trying to mess with, where's it at?
Hardware colors?
Down here, yeah, hardware color.
Oh,
And,
well, I went into that one, but I didn't see much of a choice.
See, I have multiple devices. It's recognizing the Dell's 22-inch monitors. There's two of them. One's all marked uncalibrated. There's a calibration button. Gee, I wonder what that might do. And then you can add profiles if you need to on, say you have multiple display screens. Why I got the Brother, I don't know. Brother is my laser printers.
Yeah, I have my camera and then my printer showing up 3 times on the screen.
I don't understand that, but I'm not going to worry about it right now. That's something for another day. So I'm going to get out of that.
Calibration.
So, I mean, a lot of this stuff is, you got to play with it. It ain't for somebody else to always play with this stuff. And hopefully you remember it. It's
no matter what I click on this screen, it just pops up a little window that says this device is not color managed or manageable.
Okay, that means it cannot change the color palette of that display. Or in your case, you want to do a calibration possibly of the webcam, not the screen.
It says this device is not color managed,
Then-
but calibration is grayed out. I can't click on it.
Then, basically speaking, if that's for the screen, that means you have to use the buttons on the screen you're using to alter the color palette. It cannot be done via the computer sending a signal to the monitor to do adjustments by the computer. Same would be true for possibly a webcam camera.
Dennis, you might look at the LM button and go up to graphics. I think it's graphics. No, it's sound and video. After the meeting, and then there's a camera button up on top. It might be in there.
That's funny. When I scroll down all applications, it goes down to sound, but it doesn't say sound and video.
It's not in all applications.
Oh, it was under which one?
The category.
In the category, there should be a sound and video category.
Yeah.
You click on that and it pops up on the right-hand side and should have all your applications, and camera should be one of those applications.
Well, when I click on sound and video, it shows 4 choices: celluloid, GUC view, hypnotics, and rhythm box.
Dennis, with GUVC view, I showed a way to use GUVC view in controls only. You can set up an icon for that. Don't try to use GUVC view itself, because it can't share. You can't share video between Zoom and GUVC view in their preview window. But if you set it up for the controls only, GUVC view has control over how the color appears and various other camera controls. So the thing you can create, the thing you're going to need to do is to make an alteration in that option under sound and video. You'll be adding an entry. I can show what I have on my screen, but let's let Tim continue what he's doing.
I ain't doing anything. I'm trying to kill this Zoom share, and boy, is it fighting me.
Yeah, if you could kill your Zoom share, I could share what I've got.
Well, what I have to do is I have to change a setting. You may be able to share now. Try it.
Not able to, but my Zoom has been doing some weird things, so let me try it. All this. No. Yeah. Okay.
Wait a minute. I don't see it. Does anybody else?
I'm doing it now.
There
Okay.
it is.
Yeah, I changed
Okay.
the setting here. Normally, it in the Zoom here, it was doing only one at a time, and I changed it to multiple.
Now, I'm on the Linux Mint, the LM logo, and I am going to do edit menu, and I'm going to sound and video. This is what GUVC view normally is, GTK UVC video viewer. And what over here, that is an item which you can edit. And what I would do is create a new item, and I could give it the logo eventually, but the main thing is my new item is going to look like the next one I've created. And we will put that in. This is the desktop file, but what I want to do is, if I were creating No, that's not going to do it. I want to get the details. Properties. There we are. GUVC view -Z. Compare with the properties here where it's just GUVC view. That single change, -Z, is a parameter. And it will cause the controls to open without the preview window. And then you'll be able to use the controls, and I can show you what I can do with those. Let me close that way. Let me cancel that, cancel that, cancel that. This icon is my GUVC view controls. And instead of giving me a preview window which conflicts with zoom, I now have the ability to do things like change the colors, and it's your white balance you're getting. I may be able to show, let me see about killing my virtual background so you can see it better. Let me see. I may be able, no, without stopping my share, I won't be able to do that. So, anyway, what I'm going to try to do is change the white balance. And if I shift it farther one direction or another, my color will change. There's a color temperature, there's also a gain, and there's all kinds of other controls. Let's see. But anyway, that difference in temperature, that difference in color is your white balance temperature. And as long as it's not being controlled by any other application, you should be able to change it. But that's only if you use the GUVC controls. And to do that, you would create that new entry.
Well, even when you displayed that option, yours said
Edit menu, sound and video.
yeah, mine doesn't. Mine, when I do that, mine shows.
This is what it'll show. That's what you have. And what you're going to do is from this, you're going to copy down someplace the information.
Yeah,
Make notes.
GUC view, and if I right click on it, look at properties, it does say command GUC view.
Yeah, but what you want to do is create a new item below it by just doing new item. You'll give it the name. I give it the name GUVC view controls. The command would be, I'm going to type it in, but I won't actually enter it.
Okay.
GUVC view -Z.
Is there a space in there? No.
No space. It's just -Z. And that will give me, after I fill in all the other details, it will give me something that will look like this. The -Z, I gave it a name and a description. And I gave it the icon.
How did you get the window where it says new item on the right?
Okay. That is, once again, let's close this. The LM icon on the lower left for menu. I do a right click on that.
All right.
And there's this thing that says edit the menu.
Okay.
And now you would go to sound and video, and that's how I got there. So that allows you to add an item and to specify that special parameter, which prevents the preview window from trying to come up and crashing your zoom. And that way you might be able to control the color.
So you didn't have to copy anything from the GUC view. You just retype the name with a -Z on it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That was in order to create this new entry.
Right, got it.
And the new entry will have these properties.
Okay.
So that's how I did it. And all you need to know is that there's that parameter.
Okay.
And by the way, GUVC View works in it works in most Debian distros, but it does not work in all Linux, and it isn't available in all Linux. I think we had Earl here a while back who was using what does he use? KDE Neon, and it's not available for that because they use a different webcam driver. So anyway, that's something that might work for correcting colors if you wanted to do that.
Okay. Yeah.
And you would do that just on that one machine.
Right. Right.
Or you could do it for both machines. Find a compromise. But anyway,
Okay. Well, I only have the one.
there are ways of adjusting color.
Okay.
And again, there might be a way of adjusting your webcam as well, as Tim pointed out.
Well, I'm wondering if the webcam is just so cheap that it's not too adjustable. Is that possible or no?
Well, this is why GUVC View exists,
Okay.
so that you can make adjustments that may not be available in your webcam alone.
In a regular. Okay.
Tim? Or Bob, I mean.
Yeah.
I can't seem to find the view anywhere on my machine.
GUVC View you have to find in your software and install. It's available. Let me see if it's available through the software manager. I believe it is.
It must be because I don't know where I got it, and it's there.
Okay, let me just type. Yes, it is available through the software manager. GUVC View is the GTK Plus base UVC viewer in software manager. And you just install that from there.
So how do you spell that?
GUVC space view.
That's what he would look up in the software manager.
Yeah, just start with GUVC, GUVC,
Okay.
and it will show up in the software manager. GUVC.
Are you done sharing?
I did finish. I believe I stopped.
Yeah, my screen's black. I don't see anything. Yeah.
We just have Zoom CCS
Okay.
has started sharing the screen, but we don't have it.
Something's
So-
weird going on here.
Tim K has paused his screen share.
Yeah. I've been playing with this thing trying to kill it.
Hmm.
Anyway, I gotta.
Yeah, I don't see how, Bob, you're seeing those messages. Like Tim has paused his. I don't see that on either a Chromebook or on my Linux.
That's just the way it's showing up on mine.
Huh.
Come on.
I think the Zoom app controls what you see.
Right now, that Zoom app's doing whatever it wants to do, and I haven't got any way. That it does in Windows.
Uh,
Call it a feature bug. I don't care.
that is strange.
Oh,
It was working perfectly well earlier.
yeah, well, yeah, but you couldn't get out of it. That was the problem.
Hmm.
Well, I was impressed at this last APCUG meeting that was for one of them for Linux, and they had like over 100 people.
Wait a minute.
Didn't they?
The Linux didn't even take place. Judy Kahlur,
I mean-
it shut down.
Didn't they have a different Linux one? I mean, it wasn't the most recent, yeah, but there was some other one they had. Didn't they have a Linux?
There is a
Like,
Linux usually about 10 months out of the year. But
yeah.
this one got killed because she had a problem of a machine dying on her. She had a new machine coming that had to yet be configured. So you got to take it with a grain of salt. We aren't getting Linux for the month of April. And
Yeah.
I don't know that what the workshop we're getting in May, because there's a Saturday safari, but there'll only be one workshop the whole month of May.
Okay. I have downloaded the meeting document.
Yeah, the
And
meeting documents are out there, but the last one has a BW for Abbey Word. I forgot to change it to RTF.
yeah. Oh, by the way, Abbey Word is available for Windows.
Oh, it is? Huh.
Yeah. It has been for a long time.
Well, it's not something that I needed. I found other tools, and I now know how to put Word back into 24H2 and beyond.
Yeah, but sooner or later they'll kill that.
No, they killed it with 24H2. If you had any version of Windows that had Word in it,
Yep.
WordPad in it,
Yeah,
and you go to 24H2, it blows it away.
that's correct. But the
But
thing is,
I
putting
can,
it back. Okay, go ahead.
I can put it back in, and I have on my systems, and I use it.
I'm just wondering how long Microsoft will allow that to continue, or whether it's even something they can
Think
control.
you're rid of it because they're forcing people to buy Word?
No.
No, this WordPad is kind of like Abbey Word. It's a old style word processor, lightweight, and the main thing I use it for is creating RTF files. So I have hyperlinks. I could also add some graphics too if I wanted to, but I don't.
Yeah, I mean, I used it a lot on my old machines all the time, just for quick print, quick pasting, cut and paste of things. Yeah.
Right, and it can be on Windows 24H2, it disappears. There's a way of putting it back on. Whether they can absolutely block that out, I doubt it. They have just
Right.
abandoned the WordPad. There are others who have substitutes in the Microsoft Store you can, in some cases, buy, etc. But I don't think it's if you know how to put it back on the system and it's easy to do. I don't think they're going to mess with it. They did what they wanted to do, and most people won't know how to put it back on if they even know what WordPad is.
Hmm.
And if you do put it back on, I think they aren't going to do any more patching or any security patching for it. So
Oh no, there won't be.
you're responsible for your own safety.
Yeah, but I mean, there are people, whether any of us like it or not, that don't update their software like they should. Period.
Yeah.
Now, for the WordPad, I doubt anybody's going to create a attack point with it.
Yeah.
It's been around for a very, very long time, and so I doubt that anything will come of it.
Well, especially now after they got rid of it,
And
nobody's.
and the thing is, that this is on 24H2 is 11, and 11 has a lot of safety features all prior versions of Windows didn't have.
Yeah.
They got to get past all those kind of things to possibly effect some kind of a vulnerability to get into your system and take control.
I went to Costco a couple days ago and I was looking at some of the computers. And I walked around like two, three counters and looked at every one. And every one of them was saying Windows Home, Windows Home. None of them said Pro. I was surprised I didn't see Pro anywhere.
Uh,
That's
Pro
impressive.
is only needed in certain circumstances by people who know what the hell they're doing with the computer. Everybody else, and it's cheaper, by the way, get the home, especially for consumer class machines. Now, you can get consumer class with Pro, but a lot of them have home on them. And most business class are the opposite. They have mostly Pro, and only a small portion are home. But there is a difference in the original cost of Windows licensing between the two. And some of these folks just love to find where they can save a penny here and a penny there. And most people that got home, they ain't going to miss what Pro's got because they wouldn't know what to do with it if they had it. And there's a lot of people in that category. They've got the Pro. Do they know how to use the GP editor? Do they know advanced networking? Do they do network sharing a lot where they're doing the administration of it?
Well, but it's Tim, it's like you said before about like Excel and those programs that most people don't use 90% of what Excel can do. It's like I wonder why Microsoft just doesn't put the Pro out, and who cares? Most people won't use it anyway, so why bother having two versions? I don't know.
Because there are
Because-
people that do have the knowledge, especially in businesses, especially a large enterprise, large businesses, medium businesses, and even some small businesses through a outside consultant that do use those features.
Okay.
Just because you don't know how to use them and why you would use them is immaterial to Microsoft. And Microsoft years ago started and is continuing a shift away from the individual user to corporations. So unless you're a Fortune 500 company, tough. They don't care. And for most people, if you don't use LibreOffice and you want something, I would use either the Microsoft 365 free or at most the Microsoft 365 basic version. And odds are you're not going to need any of the other advanced features that the more expensive packages will run you. If you're in a corporation, you may have to use those advanced features at times. Everybody's got to do their own evaluation. Am I getting my money's worth out of what I'm paying for? If the answer is no, why are you paying for it? That's like, especially on smartphones and tablets, you have all kinds of apps by subscription, and most people, they might use it for a short period of time and say, yeah, I don't like it, or I don't want it, and but they forget to kill the subscription, and the developer doesn't give a damn, and the outfit that manages the phone, such as Apple or Samsung, to name an Android one, they don't care if you you did a subscription and it's taking money month after month, even though you're not using it. that's your responsibility. It's your money to begin with. You made a decision to get it. It's your decision to not use it. It therefore is your responsibility to kill the subscription and keep your money. Now they've got the credit unions, at least one of them at minimum. If you got outstanding subscriptions, they'll tell you exactly what you got subscribed to, and they'll kill one or all of those subscriptions for you. I don't know if they charge a fee for that or not.
Well, there's some program I keep seeing they're advertising on TV. Read something, I think. Supposed to scan your phone and see all the subscriptions you have or something.
Yeah, but one I know at least one, if not all, the credit unions. There's three main ones. They'll do it for you. Why do you need another app that you might have to subscribe to?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Anybody got anything else? Did anybody learn anything?
Yeah.
There was a lot of interesting stuff in there.
Yeah.
With or without the screen share,
Then
there was a lot of interesting stuff.
Then I expect to hear from you guys in future meetings, and some of the things you found and why you think it's a good feature. Maybe some of us that don't have that feature going might look into it further and adapt it as well.
Well, I already did a little bit on that because I showed GUVC view that can be downloaded.
Mm-hmm.
And it provides certain camera controls, at least to those who use Debian distros.
Wait.
I brought a bunch of stuff.
Yes.
Well, does anybody else have anything for this evening, or shall we call it quits?
Wow, it's late. It's late.
What do you mean, wait? Our lives are passing before our eyes, and you want us to wait.
It's late.
4:43 right now.
Okay.